Well, it's nice to be here today. I came up from Philadelphia this morning and I happened to open the Philadelphia Inquirer, and there it is. And you can't see it, but it says CEO avoids talk of suits, setbacks in Philadelphia speech. 1,600 people were there to hear Alex Gorski, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who refused to answer any questions of why he's getting his head handed to him in the courtroom. And frankly, why 1,600 people showed up other than to boo him, I don't understand. And that's one of the big problems we're facing countrywide. What I want to tell you now is, I come from a relatively big victory, as most of you probably know, with 4:48 p.m. on Tuesday, a Philadelphia jury in the Murray case, one of my Risperdal cases, awarded $8 billion, yes, billion dollars against Johnson & Johnson. They wanted to send a message, and the message is very clear, and I want you all to understand it. The message is these companies are rogue companies. You've got to find a way to put a stop to them, to deter them. And by the way, the young man is from Baltimore, from Maryland, who we got the verdict for, and now we have to battle to collect it. But the point of it is they wanted the world not to know that Johnson & Johnson did something very, very bad. They hid key data that had that information been provided, thousands and thousands of children would not have suffered from the adverse effects of Risperdal. And that information, some of it, key information, did not come out until that trial, which was a 3-week trial, and it was only for punitive damages. We had already gotten $1,750,000 compensatory verdict applying Maryland law. We filed suit in Philadelphia because Janssen, which is the subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson that sells the Risperdal, is a Pennsylvania company. That verdict, applying Maryland law because of tort reform, that's another big problem you have. You have the state legislatures. This has been an uphill battle. Way, way uphill. It's like a mountain, not just a hill. The court had to reduce the verdict because you're not allowed to get more than a certain amount in non-economic damages. So even though the Murray boy grew female breasts that couldn't be removed, he only could get $680,000 in the verdict. Then we have a mass tort program. Our judge in the mass tort program decided we couldn't get punitive damages in any of our 7,000 cases. That's how many cases we have, by the way, at the moment. There are 13,000 in the United States. The reason we couldn't is because New Jersey, in the wisdom of their state legislatures, by the way, usually Republicans, so you can tell I'm not a Republican, decided you can't get punitive damages against a drug company. That's why a lot of them locate there. We wanted to apply Maryland law, which does allow punitive damages. So we had to take that case up, and finally that got reversed, and now we were on trial just for punitive damages. So the $8 billion verdict is just for punitive damages. And the point I'm making is, we talk about, and you guys, particularly social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists, talk about trauma. You know, my wife is an art therapist and a family therapist, and I hear about trauma all the time. Can you imagine battling these kinds of cases through the courts for years and years and years? And do you think I suffered trauma? I think I must have. My wife is convinced. The point I'm making to you is it's very difficult to be in these battles. And I'm going to tell you a little story how the battles started. First of all, you have the history of how this all got going. It goes back to, in my case, I've been practicing law for over 50 years. But it goes back to Bush versus Gore. You all remember those days in Florida. And I was a good friend of Ed Rendell, who was the chairman of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee at the time. And my wife's mother is the one who started Bush versus Gore. Nobody knows that really, but that's a true story. What happened, she lives in Boca Raton. She's gone now, she passed away. But she called me about 4 p.m. 4 p.m. seems to be a common time for me. 4:48 p.m. for a jury verdict of $8 billion, 4 p.m. for my mother-in-law to call me from Boca. And Bobby Mitnick is her name. And Bobby says, it's crazy here. There's something going on. We have this ballot, and people can't vote. We don't know what the hell's going on. They can't punch out the names. And I said, calm down, calm down. It's my mother-in-law. So and she explains what happens. And I started to check. So I call Ed, and I said, Ed, something's going on in Florida that's crazy. So Ed called, and I'll show you how this all ties into Risperdal. You'll be amazed at how these crazy things happen in the world. So Ed and I talked. And then about 4 a.m., 5 a.m., Ed calls me. He says, something's going on down there. You better get your parachute on your own dime, of course, and help us out and figure out what it is. So I went down to Palm Beach County, got a couple of my friends who were lawyers there, and lo and behold, we figured out the story of the butterfly ballot, which you've all heard about. And what happened was very simple. The history of that is based on a very simple right to vote. And what we did at that point, nobody knew what to do, and my standard reaction is sue, okay? And get an injunction. So I filed suit for an injunction to bar the Palm Beach County results being certified until there was a recount and we figured out what was going on. And lo and behold, I got a temporary restraining order. That's how that litigation started. We didn't make the movie, but the true story is the original injunction against Harris certifying the Palm Beach County election was issued in Palm Beach County, and the recount begun by Judge LaBarga. That's the one you saw all those things about. And then the whole litigation started. But while that litigation was ongoing, and how does it lead to Risperdal? That's how you never know these mysteries. One of the lawyers I worked with, who's a Florida lawyer, gets a call from a woman whose teenage son, who lives in, by the way, in the Boca area, and got Prozac extended release in the mail. Now, by the way, there's the butterfly ballot, and if you look at it, you can see how that got screwed up, because if you're going to vote for, but you see where Gore's name is, and people just couldn't tell. So Gore, by the way, clearly won by 3,000 votes. Clearly, I don't care what anybody tells you, there is no doubt that Gore won the presidency. And again, we got screwed, because we ended up, as you know, with the mess that we have developed now, leading to our dear friend Trump. But that's what the butterfly ballot looks like. And that's me with Greta Van Susteren being interviewed, and I was all over the country at the time being interviewed about this case. But the point about it is, the Prozac Weekly is what started it. They were losing their patent, Eli Lilly, on Prozac. So they came up with, put some glue on it, and it became Prozac extended release. You know what do you think that is? It's glue. Make it, go slowly. And so I'm on the national television because everybody couldn't believe that Prozac extended release was being sent out in the mail without a prescription in Florida by Walgreens. That's what they were doing, the Eli Lilly reps. because they were afraid they're losing the patent. And the next thing I know, I get a call from a whistleblower. And the whistleblowers were Eli Lilly employees. And they were doing the same thing in California and Oregon, sending out Prozac extended release without a prescription. And I get a call from a guy named Jim Weta, and they said, do you know they're doing that here? So I said, what? So I decide to go out to California and find out what's going on. And lo and behold, they start telling me about a drug called Zyprexa and how it was being illegally marketed off-label to the elderly, 5 milligrams at 5 p.m., and you don't need help in the nursing home. Do you understand that? That's how it was being marketed. And then they had doctors who were turtles, rabbits. That's how they labeled the doctors, the ones who really pushed the stuff. So doctors, and so I figured, my goodness, what are we going to do about this? So, the thing is, once a drug loses a patent, its value drops immensely. So the antipsychotics were being used off-label for depression, for bipolar, ADHD, autism. Doctors are allowed, as you know, legally to sell, and I say sell, they say prescribe. I use the word sell, off-label, meaning not approved by the FDA. And so that's how this whole thing got started with Eli Lilly and what we call the, if you're antidepressant, the marketing isn't enough just to add an antipsychotic. That's a little extra pill. And that's, the common thread is illegal marketing. And doctors are involved in it, usually not knowingly, because they think it's perfectly okay. And the off-label marketing event, and they have a nice lady with, in those days, more so than today, I believe, they were using young women who had no idea what the hell they were selling. But some of them did. And they would go into the doctor's offices and bring lunches and then freebies and things like that. And that's how that ended up going. And then, of course, kids became very useful because they were the easiest marks. Kids and women, those were their marks at the time, and elderly. That's the game. So there's Gabriel and Rebecca. These are kids who were put on these drugs, true stories, who died. They died from these drugs. And we had a law that I had forgotten about when I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. And I remembered it. Luckily, my memory wasn't completely blocked out by my years of practicing. And it was called the Lincoln Law. And that was a False Claims Act law. And I said, gee, let's find, there's got to be something we can do about this illegal marketing of Zyprexa. And lo and behold, I filed the first False Claims Act case at the time against Eli Lilly on Zyprexa. And under the False Claims Act, the government gets the money, and it's a huge amount of money they can get. And in fact, I was responsible for ultimately using that act. With Eli Lilly, we ended up getting $2.2 billion. And we collected it. It's not like $8 billion that I have, but that money ended up in the bank. And believe me, I didn't get 1/3 of it. But the point I'm making is that led that one of the Eli Lilly reps took a job with AstraZeneca. He ended up selling Seroquel. And he calls me up and he says, Steve, guess what? Same thing's going on with AstraZeneca with Seroquel. Filed another False Claims Act case. That became $520 million that AstraZeneca had to pay for illegal marketing under the False Claims Act. And ultimately, 5 of the 10 largest whistleblower settlements in the United States were my cases. And it led to Risperdal. And what I consider to be probably the biggest of all of the criminal conducts that I have run into in this area. That was Johnson & Johnson. Vicky Starr is her name. She was the whistleblower. She was a young Latino girl, a pharmacist from Oregon in California. And the guys recommended she call me because she took a job with Lilly after leaving Johnson & Johnson because she didn't like what they were doing over there. And I met her. The next thing I know, and this is 2004, so you got to keep in mind how long these cases go. Because remember, this all started with Bush versus Gore. She calls me up and starts telling me about Risperdal. And we start learning about something about Risperdal that was different than the other antipsychotics. It has a problem. The problem is, unlike most of the other drugs, it causes boys to grow female breasts. It increases prolactin. They didn't want anybody to know about that. And I didn't know what the heck prolactin was. I didn't understand that. And that became the basis of the Risperdal claim against Johnson & Johnson for the False Claims Act, which, by the way, did not get resolved. Took 2013. You see how long these cases go? I used to have a lot of hair. So we had to litigate that thing for all those years, and we learned that they hid data. I had a young lawyer, Priscilla Brandon is her name. She now works for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philly. And it was December of 2009, and we're now going through millions of documents in the Risperdal claims. And we're looking, and I hear almost a scream from Priscilla, and it was December 9th, 2009, right before Christmas. She said, "Look at what I found." They knew that prolactin increases gynecomastia risk, and in fact is very bad for you, and they hid the data. They had testing. Here's table 21 showing a 98.6% certainty of the correlation. And yet they published an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry by Charles Finling as the lead author. You know where Finling is now? Anybody know? Right up the street. Chairman of Adolescent and Child Psychiatry at Hopkins. He's a hero here. He was the author. Guess what? He never read the damn thing. He put his name on it, as did the other authors, because a company called Brainworks wrote the damn thing. I'm starting to curse like Trump. And what happened is they made a conclusion in this article that there was no correlation between prolactin and increased safety risks. And that became the abstract and the lead thing, and it went all over the world. And it became the main selling point, and why one of the main reasons Risperdal became the popular drug. And they had been trying, it was off-label now until 2006, October 30th. They finally, after many years, drove the FDA crazy to get it approved for irritability related to autism. Irritability related. Most kids are irritable at times. So that became the basis for a lot of the on-label prescriptions, but they then had the halo effect where they conduct disorder, some even thought it grew toenails. So Risperdal became a mega-billion-dollar drug. And the point I'm making, we didn't get that information. It took years. 2013, the U.S. Attorney in Philly, as a result of Priscilla's discovery, and by the way, Priscilla Brandon didn't go to Penn Law, she didn't go to Harvard, she didn't go to Yale, but she was tremendous with discovery. She could work these things. I couldn't possibly do what she could do. She found these documents, the needles in the haystack. So they had to pay $2.2 billion. In the meantime, we started having kids coming to us with their parents with female breasts. Some got mastectomies, but it also changes their whole body, their testicles and things like that. You don't have any, these kids, and the psychiatrists, I very seldom ever found a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a pediatrician that ever had the kids take their shirt off to even examine their breasts. And the problem is, it's very difficult, unless you have the expertise, to detect breast tissue, female breast tissue, from fat tissue. So they would always think it was my kid's getting fat. And they were warning that it puts on weight. But they said, well, you'll exercise, you'll lose the weight. No, so that's how that whole scam got going. So that led to all those cases with Risperdal. And it's taking 15 years now. And we finally got a verdict in the Pledger case. And in fact, Steve Brill wrote a book on Huffington Post about America's most highly regarded lawbreaker. It's a very good book. It's 15 chapters. You can read it for free online on Huffington Post. It's the story of Alex Gorski. Yes, Alex Gorski, the guy that just had 1,600 people show up for a Chamber of Commerce meeting in Philadelphia. He's the CEO. And he, by the way, was head of Risperdal sales back in the 2000s when this was all going on, when they were getting illegally marketing Risperdal. And they're still illegally marketing it today, in my opinion. It's generic, but it's out there, and it's commonly prescribed by psychiatrists and pediatricians. And I just warn you, for those of you out there, and I know it's very difficult to get the kids off it because it's addictive. So once you get on it, you got a real problem. You got to figure out a way to save these kids. And boy, are their lives getting wrecked. And they reached the conclusion that they made a mistake. Multiple parabolas and all this kind of statistical stuff. And what was interesting, so they then submitted to the American Journal of Psychiatry, because one of the authors took a fit about, because the authors were not told about the hidden data. You should know, Finling didn't know about it. When he was told about it, he got a little upset. And, but what happened is, now they had to figure out a way to get around it. So they decided, we'll just say we made a mistake and come up with some statistical stuff. So they got we called him a hoagie buddy of one of the top people at J&J, because they were buddies. And they would send stuff to his home, and he was a University of Pennsylvania statistical professor. So therefore, he must know what he's doing. Of course, they didn't want to send it to Penn, so they sent it to his home, the information. And he came to these conclusions. The big problem was, we found some more computer runs, 5, that just came out in the trial that we tried in the last month. 5, hidden all these years, saying the same thing. Statistical certainty of correlation between prolactin and serious adverse events like gynecomastia, when they had published the exact opposite. And guess what? To this day, there has been no apology. There has been no recitation of anything by the American Journal of Psychiatry. They actually wrote a letter saying, oh, we were right originally, it was a mistake in the data. So you guys and your friends in the profession still think that there was no correlation between prolactin increase. And what was interesting about it, the correlation occurs of excess correlation of excess prolactin, usually between 8 to 12 weeks. The prolactin blood test is a very simple blood test, I'm told. And about 50 to 60% of the kids are going to have excess prolactin when they're on Risperdal. And it's going to go down later, but that is a key time period. Those kids are the ones who had the highest risk as high as 12% of getting adverse events like gynecomastia. All these children could have been saved. Thousands and thousands. Simple blood test, simple finding. Between 8 and 12 weeks, we had the statistical data. The doctor would say, you know what, I don't think we should put the kid on Risperdal. And by the way, there are other drugs. Risperdal is a chemical restraint, I'm sure you know that, that you can use that are bad, but not as necessarily as bad as Risperdal. But, I mean, that's just showing you some gynecomastia there. But this is another video, and where they put gynecomastia, I never heard of gynecomastia, by the way. I didn't know what the hell it was. And they hid it in the label, page 13. So even if you understood it and were a doctor, you're not going to get to page 13, are you? And you thought, because the label says it occurs in less than 1%. In 2006, they put 2.3%. But we now know today it could be, if you're on it long term, it can be as high as 12% of the kids will get it. You don't need to use that drug. And so then we have these individual cases going on. And we're in this battle is quite a battle. That's why my wife says I suffered trauma. So, you know, it's not a battle with AK-15s. It's a battle with legal technicalities and documents and stuff like that, millions of them, because that's what happens. And it's going on today, and it's still on down the street. So they gave Gorski got a get-out-of-jail-free card when they found that we couldn't get punitive damages under New Jersey law, which shouldn't have been the law. And therefore, they had no interest in settling these cases. So we ended up backed up with 13,000 cases, 7,000 my own firm. And I ended up being very lucky. I was able to form an agreement with partners, Tom Klein and Jason Itkin. Jason's from Houston, one of the top trial lawyers in the country, and Tom Klein is probably one of the best trial lawyers in the world, has the Thomas Klein Law School named after him at Drexel University. And we've tried several of these cases now. We got a $70 million verdict in one, every one of them almost. The only one, and when the judges rule against us, we almost always get them reversed on appeal. So these cases are, for those of you who want to go and buy Johnson & Johnson stock, let me remind you, I also represent today, I'm one of the law firms involved in representing the city of Philadelphia in a separate case and the district attorney of Philadelphia against the drug manufacturers, including Janssen, Johnson & Johnson, in the opioid matter, litigation. And we've got hundreds dying in Philly every year, 1,400, I think, last year. And the point I'm making is this is a battle against evil. And, you know, they gave Gorski his get-out-of-jail-free card. And then Biederman, we're fighting the academics. We're fighting the journals. Here we are deposing Dr. Biederman. Here's what he said. So we asked him, what rank are you? Answer, full professor. What's after that? Answer, God. Did you say God? Answer, yes. He got millions of dollars from J&J at Harvard, and they made him give up something for 2 years or something. He's still there. And he was responsible for good reason for many of these children being on this drug. But he's a Harvard professor. What can I tell you? He's great. He's from God. Hey, God, maybe take a look at him. And then America's Most Admired Lawbreaker, the book that Steve Brill wrote. That's, I believe, being made into a series for either Amazon or Netflix. And that's Tom on the left and me on the right. We're the story of the book about the Pledger case, a wonderful family from Alabama, a little boy who grew female breasts. And they called Tom Sean Connery. I would have preferred Sean, but me, I'm Columbo in the book. But that's from the book itself. You may want to take it. It's a great story. It's 15 chapters. You can read it online. And you'll see it probably in the movies soon. And, you know, we say the tide is turning. Yes, but the question is, luckily I have two daughters who are lawyers. Right now, I don't know if I'm going to be around when this is resolved, but, you know, the jury found, as it says, the reanalysis was a fraud. A fraud. Now, what's the University of Pennsylvania doing about their statistic professor? Nothing. What's Johns Hopkins doing about Dr. Finling and this mistaken article? No correction, no publicity about it, no anything, other than they're like Trump. I did nothing wrong. I have a red tie, you see? The point I'm making to you, there's no apology, there's no admission, all they got to do is tell the truth. Truth is missing in our society these days. So the point I'm making to you is that's the jury verdict sheet. Take a look at it. You see it? It says, did plaintiff prove by clear and convincing evidence that defendants are liable for punitive damage? See the jury check? Yes. Question, please state what sum, if any, you award in punitive damages. You see? $8 billion, 4:48 p.m. Tuesday. And we were able to do this because some people come forward, just like that Ambassador Yovanovitch came forward yesterday. David Kessler came forward. He was head of the FDA. He's a real hero. I was able to get him to be an expensive witness, yes, but he told the story to the jury in 3 days in a Debena essay deposition. And David, we need another David Kessler at the FDA. Right now, the FDA has lost its way. I believe Janet Woodcock is still there. Do any of you know Janet Woodcock? Name mean anything to you? Go look her up, head of Pharma. We need to get her the hell out of there and her team. What can you do? You could ask the FDA, how did this opioid problem develop? Well, let me tell you how it developed, because I'm in the midst of that, and I am angry, very angry. You know when they came up with that so-called safer version of oxycodone, where they put some glue in it and it disintegrates more slowly? That's what started the epidemic in the 90s. And the FDA approved it. Is the FDA responsible? Can we sue them? No. Take away their ability to not be sued. That's certainly a starter. But that's why we have the opioid epidemic to some degree. And guess what J&J did? Do you know what J&J did? Why do you think Oklahoma whacked them? Do you know? They were growing opium in Tasmania in the 90s. And as the oxycodone epidemic got going, they became the biggest, or amongst the biggest providers of the material, the base material needed to make oxycodone in the world, at least in the United States. Why does J&J get involved in all these things? Why does J&J get whacked on vaginal mesh, talcum powder? What is their problem? I wrote the book. I have a couple of books, actually. One is called Big Pharma, Big Greed. You can read the story. Another is called Pharmageddon, Our Nation. And another, Lawyering in the Time of Saints and Evildoers. So I have 3 books. I was not a book writer or an author, but I felt the need to get something out there, and I usually have people help me write it. So at least I give them credit. And the point I'm making to you today is, what can you do? I'll tell you what you can do and what you need to do. You need to boycott nationally Johnson & Johnson products. Do you understand? Until they change the way they do business. And the first step is to admit that the warnings on Risperdal are inadequate, and that prolactin levels must be monitored. First of all, I wouldn't use the drug for starters, but if you're going to use it, if you have an abnormal prolactin level in a child, you don't use the stuff, period. With regard to their vaginal mesh, they need to take responsibility. They're not taking responsibility. This is, one of the disturbing things. On Google, you'll find a picture of Gorski and Trump together. That's the problem that we have with our society. You have people like that who don't have a sense of responsibility and honesty and integrity. And what disturbs me most of all is, why did 1,600 people show up yesterday morning to hear Alex Gorski in Philadelphia, who didn't answer any questions about getting whacked so badly? Why was the jury mad? Does anybody think about that? Did anybody talk to those jurors? There were 12 people there, just regular people, regular decent people. And, oh, there he is. Found him. Anyway, how are we doing time-wise? Am I all right? And yeah, no, I'm going to answer questions, but I want you to keep in mind that we are facing the opioid epidemic right now, and that is a disaster. And the biggest problem is we don't know what to do to resolve it. Paying money for treatment. Right now we have a problem in the treatment field. Everybody wants to get their hands on the money for treatment. What kind of treatment? What kind of basic science is being done to break down these effects of addiction? This has got to be controlled. So I keep telling people, put me in charge of the FDA for 2 years. Maybe I could clean it up a little bit, but no, I'm kidding. I'm a little old for that. I've aged out. But the point I'm making to you is we can't let this turn into, and that's how I met Dave Kessler, by the way, in the tobacco litigation. I was heavily involved in that. I represented the state of California in that and got them, we got $22 billion in that. And there, by the way, at least we get free public transportation in Philadelphia for the money we got from the tobacco industry. But the point I'm making is there's so much that can be done with honesty and integrity and responsibility. So I would ask you to do a couple of things. One, consider boycotts. Consider what the FDA is failing to do. In particular, why they let these drugs get on the market. And do you notice how they're hiding from their responsibility in the opioid epidemic? Who was the responsible culprit who approved that phony kind of pasty drug that would supposedly be safer? How did that all happen? Who are those who are responsible? Right now, what about the shareholders and board of directors of these companies? How about clawing back the money they've made? Think about it. Who are the board of directors of these big companies? What have they been doing? Sleeping? So, the point I'm making is there are things that need to be done. Maybe somebody needs to have a talk with Dr. Findling and ask him to just say, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. Risperdal should not be used for children. It shouldn't be.